Well, of course, Michelle, we are outside Parliament here, as my colleague Artie and Moloto were pointing out earlier, that this is a watered down ceremony. But as you know, that ours is a constitutional democracy where it is a parliament of the people, that in as much as there's a lot of activity that takes place inside, usually there is activity that takes place outside as well, where usually members of civil society turn up around Parliament to protest. But as you can see this morning, there's not much happening around here. There's not much activity. But going back to your question, Michelle, the reality is that there will be, and of course, expectation that the president has to give South African hopes. But to what extent will he succeed? That remains the question, because we do know that he is on some kind of a back foot as he goes into the State of the Nation. He would have hoped by now to have at least had at least our health workers having been vaccinated. But you know, of course, as you know, there was that setback as a result of the withdrawal of the AstraZeneca vaccine. But also at the same time, there's a big question. South Africans are living in misery. They want to know, will the government extend the 350 unemployment grant? And as you know, last year we were told that it's going to be a year of inclusive growth, that there were going to be all these infrastructure programs, but those have come to naught due to the devastation of COVID-19. But yes, Michelle, I am joined now by Matthew Parks, who is the coordinator for COSATU here in Parliament, and to talk about some of also their expectations. Now, Matthew, we know what Labour wants. Labour has been very clear about their unhappiness with the government, particularly around the issue of the wage bill, in terms of the wage agreement. But the big question is it really realistic, though, for Labour to still expect, even when the government says they don't have money, to expect government to fork out this money, one? And secondly, realistically, what do you expect tonight?
Sure. Look, we appreciate that the wage bill wouldn't be resolved in a State of the Nation address. I think on that front, we really want to hear from the President a clear commitment from government that they respect collective bargaining and workers' rights to negotiate. We'd hope that they would come back to engage with the public service unions at the bargaining council to see what can be done. But look, we appreciate the government is in a tight fiscal space. But the reason for this fiscal crisis is because of corruption, where we lose about 10% of our budget every year. It's about a declining economy. It's about losing tax revenue. So government has to address those issues. Simply imposing a 4-year wage freeze on public servants isn't addressing that. You're not resolving corruption or collapsing SOEs or a stagnant economy. So you have to find the right solution for the right problem. But also, if you impose a wage freeze, you're going to find a disgruntled public service is not going to help you to implement what needs to be done. They'll be demotivated, demoralized, etc. You will also have a danger that skilled public servants like nurses and doctors, teachers, etc., will be poached not only by the private sector, where they get paid better wages, but in fact also by other wealthier countries in Europe and Australia, the Middle East, etc. So it's a very dangerous, reckless route if it's not handled properly. But the bottom line
You talk about fighting corruption, and the president every week in his weekly letter talks about fighting corruption, including this week. Are you not convinced that enough is being done to fight corruption?
We believe the president is committed to fighting corruption. He removed most of the corrupt ministers from cabinet when he became president. But we've yet to see anybody go to jail. We have seen very few assets being attached. We've seen very few changes to the law or to the public procurement framework. So for us, when we see people being sent to prison, the assets being attached, when we see public procurement being overhauled, being made transparent, and the many holes in the fiscus that the Auditor General identifies, then we'll be convinced that government is moving. But the fact is that every year the Auditor General shows us in his reports of departments, municipalities, parastatals, that we're losing about 150 billion rand every year to corruption and wasteful expenditure. So the proof will be in the pudding.
Now, Matthew, the president talks about social compacts. That was the theme last year. What do you see as Labour's role in that social compact?
Sure, and we've supported that completely because government can only do so much. The private sector also has to play a critical role, and of course, as workers, we're ready to play that role. That's why we drafted the ESCOM Social Compact, because here it's about not only what workers need in protecting workers' jobs and wages, but also what can we do to help society, what can we do to help government stabilize, to grow the economy. So we must all play that role. That's why we also played a key role in developing the economic recovery plan. So for example, on the local procurement front, we've committed to making sure that as unions, when we procure goods, they're locally produced. We're appointing local procurement champions in our unions to make sure that in the different workplaces, to the different bargaining councils, sector of the economy, we drive local procurement. We also have a role as unions to expose corruptions, be it in the parastatals or in the private sector or in government. So the success of the country depends upon all of us, including us as Labour.
Now, we always hear, and including with the very economic recovery plan that you talk about, we hear about the social compact and the partners coming together, particularly at NEDLAC level. And the president presented in October last year the economic recovery plan. But it's becoming clearer as we see business coming up with their own economic recovery plan and also some pushback from COSATU that there doesn't seem to be any coherence or any coherence rather actually when it comes to this social compact or also this recovery plan. What exactly is the stumbling block as you understand?
Look, sure, each constituency has different interests. Business is about profit, Labour is about saving jobs and saving wages, governance has to govern. I think on most issues we have managed to find each other relatively quickly. The economic recovery plan is about immediate interventions that can help unlock the economy, spur economic growth. Areas where we have consensus, so for example on local procurement, on ramping up infrastructure investment, on tackling corruption, on providing economic and social relief for distressed workers and companies. Those are the more easy part. The difficulty will be implementation from all of us, from government and from business in particular. We still have to have further discussions about medium and longer term interventions, which to be honest will be much more hard, where we're going to have to find compromises and find how can we meet each other halfway.
Right, that was Matthew Parks, who is the coordinator for COSATU here in Parliament. As you can hear, Michelle, that the expectations remain around where the president must convince the country and also Labour that he is serious about fighting corruption. And I think also the other big question is to be which sectors this time around will he highlight as those ones that will be driving this economic recovery. But I guess it's a few hours, in fact it's a lot of hours between now and 7 p.m. But we will be out here speaking to a number of stakeholders just to get their sense of where they are and what their expectations of tonight's address. Back to you. For now, it's back to you at the studio.